3 men on, 2 men out. Game tied 1-1 in the ninth inning. And the windup and the pitch. He swings a line shot. Base hit. Right field. The Tigers win it. Here comes K-Line to score. And it's all over. Donward singles. The Tigers mob Don. K-Line has scored. The fans are streaming on the field. And the Tigers have won their first pennant since 1945. Let's listen to the bedlam here at Tiger Stadium.
It has tremendous history, and I know that the people have went to that ballpark probably as kids now, and now they're taking their kids there. It's tough to lose those things, but progress, happens, and you got to say goodbye sometime.
Man on first and a man on third. 1 man down. 2-2 the count on Willie Horton. Here's the set by Segui, the pitch. Swung on, a drive to left. That'll be the ball game. It's over the head of Gosga. McLean wins his 30th. Here comes Cantor in to score. Willie Horton single, and the ball game is over. And the Tigers win it 5-4. Jenny McLean is one of the first out of the dugout. Racing out, and Horton is mobbed as the Tigers come from behind, and McLean has his 30th victory of the 1968 season.
There is no ballpark quite like Tiger Stadium. The atmosphere, the electricity created by a full house, I don't believe that you can get that same feeling in any other ballpark.
Working up the set position now. He goes to his set. Kittle waits. Here it comes. He struck him out, and Morris has a no-hitter. Lance Parrish goes out and grabs him, and the Tigers get a no-hit performance for the first time since 1958 when Jim Bunning did it.
I probably spent more time in a ballpark with my father than most kids spend with their fathers in a lifetime. When I was a kid, we went to every single weekend ball game, and we talked. The ballpark really means my father.
Here's the pitch. He swings. There's a long drive to right, and it is a home run for Gibson. A 3-run homer. The Tigers lead it 8-4 in the 8th inning.
That's the beauty about a place like Tiger Stadium. It's the beauty of all the different types of people that you come into one together. You coexist together.
Who hasn't been to the corner of Michigan and Trumbull? Who hasn't seen a ball game in Tiger Stadium? This is Joe Falls, and as we all know, this is the last year of our old ballpark, and we wanted to pay tribute to it by talking to those who have been a part of the history of Tiger Stadium. Personally, I've covered the Tigers for the past 47 years, and Tom Gage, our baseball writer at the Detroit News, figured out with his handy-dandy calculator that I've spent more than 4 days of my life riding up and down in the press box elevator. So this is really a celebration of Tiger Stadium. It was the idea of Irwin Cohen, a former member of the Tigers front office. We're calling it Echoes of Tiger Stadium, and that was Irwin's idea too. And we begin with George Cantor, columnist for the Detroit News, a man who covered the 1968 champions, who puts it all into perspective for us. George, you've been a lifetime resident of Detroit and also a lifetime follower of the Tigers, okay? Why is this stadium so important, not only to the people in Detroit, but all over Michigan?
I think it speaks to 3 things. It speaks to the lost city, the Detroit that used to be, the city that most people like to remember and hope that someday will be there again. It speaks to childhood. It's one of the most people's fondest memories of being a kid growing up. And it speaks to family, because usually the person that you first shared that experience of going to Tiger Stadium with was your dad or your mother or an older brother, somebody that you held very dear when you were growing up, and that was who took you there for the first time. I can still remember my first game vividly, going to see the Yankees in 1948, and Joe DiMaggio hit a home run off Hal Newhouser, and I can still see that ball going over the 365-foot sign, and I didn't know who Joe DiMaggio was, I didn't know who Hal Newhouser was, they were just names. But that image is as clear as a bell. And I treasure it now because I realize now who these guys were. And I saw this moment, and it'll always be with me. And I was with my dad, and it's a very special memory. Just as I hope my daughter will remember the first time we went to a ball game together in 1983 and she saw Lou Whitaker hit a home run. I don't know who was pitching for Cleveland that day, but I'm sure that's something that'll stay with her, especially because she learned how to yell Lou, and that was that was her big memory for that day. You know, and my grandfather saw Ty Cobb play, and my dad saw Greenberg and Gehringer, and I saw Kaline and Lolich, and my daughter saw Whitaker and Trammell in that ballpark, and that's part of all our memories and always will be.
You know, you've told me in the past when we worked together how much your father meant to you in taking you to these games. How deeply was he into it? I have a sense, and we've been together here, you and I, for many, many decades. Now, I have a sense that your father truly loved going to the ballpark.
I think it was so important to him back in the Depression when things were really bad for his family, and he was forced to drop out of school and work at a job that he hated. And in the middle of all this, there was the Tigers, and he kept scrapbooks. He kept box scores of every game they played, very orderly pasted into these books from every year from 1934 to 1938, and you could tell they just meant so much to him. And my mother, who at best is an occasional fan, she still speaks with such affection over Schoolboy Rowe and Gehringer. These are the Tigers. You know, everything else afterwards are pale imitations, but those are her Tigers. And it plays a very important part in my family's memory package.
You know, you and I worked together, 68, probably the greatest season that this team ever had, not only to win the pennant as they did after losing it during the strike-torn year in 67, and then beating the Cardinals, coming from behind, winning in St. Louis. Looking back on it, George, now you've written the book on the 1968 champions, what it meant to the city, what it meant to the team, what it meant to yourself. What did Tiger Stadium represent then to a city that was so torn apart, 43 people killed in the riot, millions of dollars of damage? What did it mean, George, in 68 for that team to come back after such a horrific year for everybody and win the ballpark? What did it mean?
The ballpark in 68 represented stability, the way things should be. This was a city that was torn to its core by what had happened to it. There was distrust, there was fear, there was hatred. And yet we could still assemble at this symbol of the past, this symbol of the strong city that used to be, and forget for a little while all the animosities, all the rumors that were going on outside, and get together and cheer for this team. This was our team. You know, it wasn't black, it wasn't white, it was the Tigers. And just as they had always been, they were still there. And in that old ballpark, that I think that was part of it too. The setting, the historic setting, knowing that you looked around and you're seeing the same things that you saw when you were a kid growing up. That was important because it was really vital in those years to have that link to the past.
All right, you and I worked again in Tiger Stadium and that vast press box, and we were there at nights and we're grinding out the copy, and we traveled on the road, and we got along pretty good. Tell me something about being a baseball writer for those 4 golden years in your life in the ballpark. What was it like for you to sit there up in the press box where you had never been, okay, as a kid? What was it like in the Tiger Stadium press box for you, working with me, working with these other men, watching the team, interviewing these guys? What was that like for you?
Well, to say that was like a dream come true was an understatement. To get a job like that was beyond my wildest imaginings when I was growing up. That simply couldn't happen. Even when I knew that I was going to go into newspaper work, that was beyond my ambitions. It was just a series of accidents that got me into that job. I wish maybe I had been a little older at the time so I could have appreciated it more, because I was really young and it was happening so fast, and I was right in the middle of 2 of the most exciting seasons in Tiger history, 67 and 68. And I really wish I could have stopped time a little bit better than I did and appreciated it more for what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, the friendships I was making, the just the idea of being there. You know, I know when I first set foot on the grass of Tiger Stadium, my first season in '66, I cannot express to you what that felt like. That was for somebody who had grown up in that ballpark and have worshipped the players I saw down there. To be actually standing there myself was a thrill beyond comparison. And then to be privileged to chronicle this pennant and World Series in '68, it's an astonishing thing, you know. And it's been more than 30 years, and I don't think a week goes by when somebody still doesn't mention the fact that I was the baseball writer in '68. And I don't flatter myself that I was that fantastic a baseball writer. I think just the impact that team made on the town, it riveted my name to those events. And it really was, you know, not only a turning point in my career, but a turning point in my life.
You know, what's impressed me about you, George, is that while we worked together only 4 years, you've maintained, I don't want to call it love, because maybe that's the wrong word, but you've maintained this great interest and affection, that's your word, for this ball club. What's that all about?
Well, I love the game. I do love the game. And I think if you grow up in Detroit and the Tigers become a part of your childhood, it gets in your blood and you don't shake it. I have friends who live in Los Angeles, and they get one of those big television dishes and they bring in the telecast from those games. And I know people like this all over the country, and the Tigers see them too when they go to different ballparks in Texas and California. They come out. The Tigers are still their team. The Tigers are truly a national team, and I think it has to do a lot with the memories of being in that stadium when you were a kid. There is something about it that you just never shake. They're your team forever.
Your reaction in '68 when Wirt shot the single to right field, K-Line scored, place went crazy. You remember that the Red Sox had already lost or beaten somebody, Baltimore, I guess it was, and Jim Campbell wouldn't put up the score because he thought there'd be a riot in the ballpark. And then your feelings about going downstairs and seeing that tumultuous scene that we hadn't seen in our life, George. We hadn't seen this, and now here it was.
I remember you writing that this was always happening somewhere else. You never thought that you would see this happening to your ball club that you'd been covering, of course, much longer than I had. And to go down into that clubhouse to the scene of utter madness. The one thing that moved me most that night, I remember, was Bill Freehan. Detroit kid. He understood, maybe more than anyone else, what this meant, the impact this was having on the city. I saw him just almost carrying other people off the field and into the dugout, and my eyes filled with tears because this was, a dream come true for him. And I tried to keep dispassionate because that's my job as a journalist. But, holy cow, this was the team of my childhood. And I was seeing them win the first pennant in my memory. And, I sit and I think about things that happened in those years today, all these years later. And sometimes I get a tear in my eye because I remember the emotional jolt that had for everybody in the city. I don't think anybody who lived through that will ever forget how they felt inside when that all happened.
I enjoyed it all. I enjoyed having you at my side, taking my place as the baseball writer at the Detroit Free Press. I'm going to end it with just this simple comment. The one thing I didn't like, George, and I may as well get it out in public before the fans and God, whoever's going to listen to this tape, the thing I didn't like at all was that you always outwrote me. Who can forget Kirk Gibson's home run in the 1984 World Series and his war dance around the bases? If I say to you, Tiger Stadium, what does that mean to you? Why was it such a unique place to play baseball?
Well, what I remember about Tiger Stadium is it's where I was introduced to baseball. That's where baseball became something of it's where it gained credibility. I stood out in the backyard with my dad every day and played catch. But when I went to Tiger Stadium, I remember walking in and seeing the total green stadium and the big scoreboard. And that's what gave the game credibility to me as a kid. That's what made me pursue it with passion. And, Tiger Stadium is, I'm one of the few guys who grew up and viewed, it was my first professional ballpark that I went to, and had the opportunity to stay here and become part of Tiger Stadium's history.
What did it feel like playing there? Everybody says the Detroit fans are knowledgeable. They know what's going on. It's an old ballpark. Have the overhanging right. We got center field is 9 miles away. Character.
Ton of character. You can look at the stadium. It says Detroit. It's rough looking. It's tough looking. It's blue collar. You see people coming down. The people of the city come down to it. I remember the greatest Tiger fan is a guy who used to sit out when I was a rookie. I remember a guy who had a real gruff voice, sat in the lower bleachers in right center field. His name was John Marimani. He's at every single Tiger games. He'd call me Slugger, and he'd yell at Sparky. He'd say, "Hey, Spark!" He'd say, "Hey, Sweetness!" He'd call Lou out there. He'd call everybody out there, and we'd all go out there. And here's a guy who just, paid the usher to get in every day. He never bought a ticket. And, that's how it used to be at the old ballpark, okay? And you guys would go in and they'd take care of the usher when John Fetzer owned that club. And they'd sneak into the bleachers, and he was there. He didn't want to sit in the Tiger Den's today seats. He wanted to be in the lower right center field bleachers. He was there every game. He let us know he was there every game, and he was there for BP, and he called us over. And, the guy's just an ordinary guy, and, I've gotten to know this guy since 1979, and I see him regularly. I gave him a job at one time. He couldn't keep the job because he was out at night and he was prowling around. And now, though, the guy finally gets it. And, it's just proof. That's the beauty about a place like Tiger Stadium. It's the beauty of all the different types of people that you come into one together. You coexist together. And here's the guy. I saw him just the other day. And he's now meeting my kids, and he invited me over a month ago to his house for the first time and showed me all the little trinkets of Tiger history and Tiger Stadium history, the green seats, the tickets, the pictures of K-Line. And I mean, it's just incredible. And that's, again, when you ask me about Tiger Stadium, those are the things that come to my mind.
You can answer this one way or the other. I don't know how you'll answer it, but all the fans in Detroit, all the people in Detroit, now you've played all over, both leagues, are they any different in any way?
Well, they are, because I just think Detroit has a personality of its own. I think if you go around and ask the perception about Detroit in general, would you want to live there? People would say no. Well, we all choose to live here, and there's a reason for that. That's why I think we're different. I think we see what Detroit has to offer. We have a lot of personality. We have a lot of character. We have a lot of history and origin about ourselves. We're really more together than people really think we are, and we have an ability to see the beauty. We work together. We're a hard-working group of people. That I think that's common. And Detroit's got a bad rap, but we're all working together to prove to everybody in the country that not only is it not a bad place to live, but pay attention, because maybe you'll learn something.
Fans have been on you from time to time, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, early in my career, fans were on me, media was on me, and that happens in most cities. And some of it was brought on by myself, and some of it was maybe brought on to me just by the fans because of the high expectations that were put upon me. But it was a great learning process for me, and we've all learned to respect each other and how we are, and it's turned out to be a pretty good friendship. And that's the lesson in life. I believe that things happen in life for a reason. Pay attention, and we've both grown from the experience.
You learn this all in the ballpark? In the ballpark you can learn that stuff?
Sure you do. I mean, no matter what you do in life, just pay attention and take notes, because there's life's lessons here, and we can say, are we a plus or are we a minus? We're pluses, and that's the important thing, and that's what we've learned together.
1984, fifth game, Tiger Stadium, San Diego. Eighth inning, Tigers were ahead 4-3. Now they brought in the flamethrower. I think the best relief pitcher I have ever seen. He's number one with me, Goose Gossage. You're up. The ball winds up. Zammo, upper deck. Tell me about that moment in Tiger Stadium.
Well, the thing about it is, in 1984, we got off to the great start, and then we beat Kansas City in 3, and now we're with San Diego. And what happens is when you get out ahead is you're afraid because everybody's after you. And, you know, even though we had a 35-5 start, if we don't win the World Series, it's a failure. So you always have that fear. And we were in the 5th game in Tiger Stadium, and we knew if we lost, we had to go back to San Diego, which we did not want to do. And, you know, we wanted to close it out. That situation comes up. It's 4-3. And you got to understand when you're in a World Series, you basically breathe one breath between every pitch. It's just pins and needles. And, you know, you're doing that. And now we've done it for 5 games. And we jumped out to an early lead. I hit a 3-run homer in the first inning. But then San Diego started clawing back. And next thing you know, it's 4-3 in the bottom of the 8th. I come up. We have guys on second and third with 1 out. Dick Williams, the Padre manager, orders Gossage to walk me. Gossage calls him out. He says, no. And, you know, Goose Gossage had owned me in my Major League career. My first Major League bat was against Goose Gossage, and I struck out on 3 pitches. And, you know, he had good success against me, and I know his thinking is, I've had good success against this guy, let me strike him out. Well, of course, I'm standing there as Dick Williams walks out, and I'm thinking, I know what he's thinking. And I'm thinking overhang. The wonderful thing about Tiger Stadium, 305 feet down right field. And he's thinking about striking me out. He talks Dick Williams into pitching to me. Second pitch, I take him upper tank. Now, the relief was, first of all, never forget it. Because, first of all, we know it's game, set, match, World Series, Detroit Tigers. That's out of the way now because that's a 3-run homer. Now we're ahead 7-3. We got Willie Hernandez who can come in. We know we've got it won. Not only do we know we got it won, every fan in Tiger Stadium knows we have it won. And the biggest party that I can ever remember takes place, and it starts right there in Tiger Stadium. And, you know, 3 outs later, I just remember the fans just pouring out on the field and picking all the sod up. There wasn't a piece of sod left. Everybody took a piece of the infield and the outfield. They were taking everything they could, and it was just like when I left that stadium 2 hours later, and people weren't leaving. And the beautiful part about it was, as many problems as, you know, cities have and people have, briefly, we were all one, and nobody was thinking about any of their problems.
Father Vincent Horken is a retired Catholic priest and is one of the few people around who saw Ty Cobb play. Well, didn't you tell me something about what the businessmen would do in the center field bleachers, lower deck? I think that was kind of interesting. What happened there?
Stories he told by a friend of the neighborhood was reminiscing with me about his early years in Detroit. He had come over from Ontario, Woodstock, Ontario, what they called a freshwater immigrant, you know. And Bill said that after he came to Detroit, he got to work at Ford's, and he favored the night shift because that meant he could go to Navin Field in the afternoon, and that's where he'd get into the bleachers for 50 cents. Bill, that's all he could afford. But Bill said the thing that was the phenomenon was these fellas. He said the young wealth of Detroit, the DAC crowd, as he put it, Detroit Athletic Club, said they could have been in box seats, but what they would do of an afternoon was come right into the bleachers there, day after day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That was ball games at that time in history. And he said their only purpose was to badger Cobb, go after Cobb, get him mad. As Bill said, the madder they'd get him, the better Cobb would play ball, see? And he'd come out trotting out to center field to start the game, and they'd start in, and the opening line was always the same. Why, You remember this was less than 50 years after the Civil War, so the only line was, "Why, you Southern so-and-so." He said maybe Johnson was pitching or somebody like that, and "You never could hit this guy." They'd go right after him. Cobb would go back at him, and he might go in and hit a three-bagger and then steal home. See? Come back at the crowd. But that was daily fare in those years, and you know these characters going out to the bleachers, and the satisfaction was just getting Cobb mad.
Has there ever been a more wondrous person to play in Tiger Stadium than Willie Horton? You saw the ballpark as a young man. You played in it as a young man, and then you played it as a professional. And I know the feeling you've had for this place. But in your words, what has Tiger Stadium meant to you?
Well, Joe, Tiger Stadium meant to me in my life. As a kid growing up, as 12-year-old, I used to slip in the back gate. And one day I got caught, and me and my buddy, and they taken us around to the front office, and we run into the guy when I first met John Hand, the clubhouse guy. And I never have idea he'd become part of my life in the future, but he got us little weekend jobs down there. We used to go down after school in the summertime when he used to bring the trucks in the back, and we used to go in behind the truck and hide, and we have the best seat in the house. But I think that's where I got beginning in my life, and then from there it just came history, and raised up down there, and also going back and playing an all-city game against Cass Tech. And I remember hitting my first home run at Tiger Stadium was hit that light tower that Reggie hit in All-Star, hit the bottom of it. And they go back, I remember the umpire looked at me and said, "You got to run." It scared me. I mean, I really got frightened. I never seen a ball take off like that. And the umpire at home plate said, "You got to go around the base to get a home run." And then coming up as a Tiger and looking back through my life and what Tiger meant to me in my life, and gave me opportunity as a young man come through the organization and go out and perform, and played 18 years in the big league. And you know, being around people like Kaline, Calavita, Gage Brown, and them type of people, I think I was very fortunate. I mean, I had many parents away from home in a professional sports that really taught me how to become a very professional person on and off the field.
1968, the throw that got Lou Brock at the plate, and so much has been said about it. We had the great picture of freehand blocking Lou off the plate, and I know Lou, and he said, "No, I was safe. For years I was safe." Come on, Lou, look at the picture. But the thing that always got me, more than the play at the plate, was the throw that you made on the fly. From deep left field. This is not a shallow left field thing where you get a guy at the plate. That was deep left field. Now, tell me about that moment.
I tell you, that moment, it's always, every time I go to the ballpark, I think about that throw. But the makeup of that throw is having good people. We work together as outfielders. Myself, Stanley, North, and Kaline Gates, we talked about plays before it happened. And actually, we talked about that play before it happened. It could have been either one of them guys. And what happened to Luke Brock, people don't realize, being successful in the National League, stealing all the bases, and we picked up from films and talking about when he was at first base, that when he started running around second, the ball hit the outfield, he kind of drifted into third. And we picked up, he did the same thing with his second. And
he drifted, you mean, right?
He just broke his stride and drifted into home plate or third. And then another thing we picked up, the coach relaxed. That's Luke Brock running. And then the guy on deck circle, he relaxed. He didn't have no support. But I think it came from a lot of how we work at outfield. Then we used to go to ballpark and we talked about other hitters, how to do my job. My job at that time, knowing who was hitting the ball, knowing what the score was at the time, and I look back at that, it was like two plays set up in one. You know, it was a suicide play really. If they had went up on, we might not have came back. And my job then, knowing who was on second base, knowing that Luke make these mistakes, then the important thing, Freehand had to make the decision, and Freehand had to make the decision to let the ball either come through or keep the guy advancing second. So it was a combination of team play. And as I look back, I said thanks to Kaline, Stanley, and them people putting they spent a lot of time with me where I became more than just a regular outfield. I became a quality first-class outfield. I spent a lot of time with Mickey Stanley, a lot of time with Al Kaline, North. All them guys helped me because I was a catcher as a kid, and it took me a course of about 8 years to quit throwing like a catcher. But the important thing is show you everybody got a part to play on a team, And if you have a leader, you might be a better hitter or whatever than another guy. But we looked at K-Line, first of all, as our leader of the whole team. But we looked at Mickey Stanley as a leader in the outfield, and we listened. And I'll tell you, when you listen to your leader out there, it make your job much easier.
Jim Schmakel is a long-time clubhouse man of the Tigers and a man who has seen it all from the inside. Give me some idea of what it was like with some of these players in the clubhouse in all your years there.
Funny stuff happened. I'll give you a funny story about Jack Morris. He came in, they usually want to do one thing. They want to shout, or they want to hit the wall, or they want to throw their spikes or whatever. And he came in, and this is back before they had the ceiling in, and we had these wires that went to the TVs I had hooked up, orange wires, maybe 15 feet in the air that draped across the whole clubhouse. And he came in, and he always busted into the trainer's room for whatever reason, and then came out, and there was a garbage can sitting right in his way, and he kicked it. And the thing, literally, it was a good field goal. It went perfectly up in the air, circled like a football, end over end. The garbage was full. It went over these wires, which probably 10 feet in the air. It came down and landed perfectly. Not a piece of garbage went out. And I remember we all just started cracking up. We thought it was hilarious because it was perfect. He wanted to make a mess, and he kicked it up in the air and landed. So I remember that. That was funny. I really don't think players bust up clubhouses like you'd really think. One on Kirk Gibson, and Kirk, I think, remembers this. His last year with the team, he came in. He must not have done good at an at-bat, but he came walking in. And anybody knows where my office is a locker next to the coffee pot. And he walked into the clubhouse, and I think he'd cracked his bat on the at-bat, and he meant to throw his bat into the garbage, but he was having a bad day, so it missed the garbage, and it hit on the end and bounced up and hit above there used to be a spray machine on this table, and hit a pipe, and the pipe ricocheted towards me. It hit the top coffee pot, and the coffee pot fell perfectly and landed right next to me and just dumped the hot coffee, just missing me, and the bat ended up on my neck. And it was real quiet. And then I heard Kirk suddenly said, "Hey, Schmakel, you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm all right." But, he didn't mean to do it, but just one of those funny things, how the thing just bounced around like a ping pong ball.
Jim Price is one of the Tigers' radio voices, but he was also a backup catcher on the 1968 World Champions. Jim, we'd like to have old Norman Cash, number 25, on this tape, but that's quite impossible. He's gone. And we saw him and we knew him, and what a colorful guy he was. But you, of all people, probably knew him better because you were his roommate. Tell me a little about Norman.
Well, Norman Cash was the greatest. No one loved to play baseball as much as Norman Cash, and not many people played it as well. But I roomed with him in 1971. Billy Martin was the manager, and Billy and Norm liked to go out and do their thing, have a good time. I was not fond of drinking. I have nothing against it, but I was used as the driver, kind of the guy to make sure I got everybody back to the motel at somewhat of a decent hour. We're in Kansas City, and we're over a couple different hangouts, and Norm had a good bit to drink, as had Billy. It's about 4 or 5 in the morning, and we go back to the hotel, and Norm, I had to put Norm over my shoulder and carry him up through the freight elevator in the old fireman's carry, which I did. I got him up there, I opened the door, I threw him down in bed. The minute I threw him in bed, the sun was coming out. Now, you got to remember that. The minute I threw him down in bed, the phone rang, and it was apparently one of his girlfriends, and they started talking, and they were arguing. Next thing I know, Norm pulled the telephone out of the wall, threw it out the window, then he took his watch off his wrist and threw that out the window. Now, you got to imagine, this is sun's coming up, sunny morning, Kansas City. We have a doubleheader that afternoon against Kansas City, and I knew I had to catch because there was a couple left-handed pitchers going. I knew Bill would be playing first base freehand, so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he threw his watch out. I knew that watch was a present from one of his girlfriends. So I said, I got to get that watch. So I go back down the freight elevator. I only have my shorts on. I figured, who's going to see me, on the back street in Kansas City, 5, 6 in the morning with the sun just coming out. So I'm down there picking up the pieces, and lo and behold, I get a tap on my shoulder. It's one of Kansas City's finest. He says, young man, can I help you? He said, you look awful good in those shorts. He said, they are boxer shorts. You don't look too bad. And I looked up and I said, oh my gosh, am I in trouble? So make a long story short, he took me down to the police station. And I did some fast talking, promised a lot of tickets for the game, some autographed baseballs, Al Kaline autographed bat, and so forth. So the next game, the police are at the game. They're having a good time. They didn't lock me up. I go 0 for 8 in the game. Now imagine, I didn't have anything to drink. Doubleheader. Norm Cash, I think, went about 6 for 8 in the game and drove in 5 or 6 runs. One of the greatest guys I've ever been around. Just terrific. Didn't bother him at all. Stormin' Norman.
Some think Ted Williams was the best hitter in baseball. At the age of 81, he recalls some of his most memorable moments in Tiger Stadium. You love to hit in Tiger Stadium. I looked it up recently, and you hit 55 home runs in Tiger Stadium. Only Babe Ruth with 60 had more. What was there about our ballpark that you liked?
Well, I think it wasn't. The ballpark was certainly a great place to hit. And, but, you know, the best thing about my experience in Detroit was that you guys had a hell of a pitching staff. And everyone on that pitching staff thought they could get anybody out. And there was none of this dilly-dallying around. They come right at you. I could name 20 pitchers there. And I only wish, of all the pitchers that were in that ballpark, that I could have seen Schoolboy Rowe when he was right. Because I know he must have been something. But anyway, all the pitchers in that ball club had a little arrogance about them. We get them in here. And, I remember the first time I walked in that ballpark. And I can't remember, I think it was Carey, a little guy named Carey, the utility infielder with the Red Sox. And I walked into the stadium, out of the dugout, and looked up, and I saw the stadium, and I give it the old 360 look. And he said, I saw Jim Bottomley hit one up in the press box. And I thought, oh, baloney. Well, first time I got up, I hit one up there, too. And the next time I hit one over. But it was just one of those things, you know.
All-star home run. You know what I remember? The way you jumped around first base. You were so excited, so elated. 1941, Joe D. just beat out the ground ball. He kept the inning alive, and you come up against Claude Passeau of the Chicago Cubs. All right, take it from there for me.
All right. That's the first time I ever get any demonstration of great feeling that I ever had going around the bases. It was the first, the biggest, the most that ever happened to me. And when I got around first base, I started clapping and jumping and striding longer and everything else. And then I saw it the next day on Movietone News. And I was so embarrassed. Oh, God, I said, I'll never do that again. And now, you know, you see the players today, they do everything, which is great. It's great. But when I saw what I'd done, I felt embarrassed as hell. But I couldn't help it.
Was there ever a finer man in our ballpark than the modest Paul Carey, who worked in that radio booth with Ernie Harwell for all those years? What was it like in that booth?
The original booth. You remember the ones that hung down and we used to climb out of the second deck?
Yes.
And go through a trap door and down some steep ladder to get into the hangar.
Right.
And then you had to go along through the photographer's loft, really, onto the far end next to the screen. And then we had this heavy metal fencing that would bring up in front of us. And it was necessary most of the time because of the foul balls. Howard Stitzel worked the first 2.5 years as our engineer, and then I wound up doing it for the next 16 years. And Howard never he didn't like baseball. You know, Howard liked the surroundings. He liked the hot dogs. He liked the popcorn. He liked the food. He liked the girls. He loved the view that he had of the ladies that would come to the ballpark. I thought, okay, but he would close the shutter up. That we used to have to close up after each broadcast. He'd close the shutter up and not even look at the game. And he'd be behind the shutter even. But we'd have that big metal mesh in front of us, and we needed it. But there would be some balls that would come in sometimes when the shutters were down and when the mesh was down. And we got a few, but nobody got hit there. I got knocked off the air in Cleveland with a foul ball coming back in the booth and smashed an amplifier, and then we were on the air with the telephone for the rest of the day.
Ted Williams always said that Virgil Trucks was the toughest pitcher he ever faced on the Detroit Tigers. Virgil, you know, of all the games that I think of in Tiger Stadium was one that I didn't see. It was the game in 1952 when you pitched the first of 2 no-hitters. General Douglas MacArthur was marching through town on a parade, not many people in the ballpark. You played Washington that day. Bob Porterfield pitched against you. And take me to the bottom of the 9th inning because you had a no-hitter going and there was no score in the game. What happened?
What happened was it was one of those deals where Porterfield pitched a terrific ball game against me. You know, we didn't get a hit off of him until the 7th inning. It was a no-hitter on both sides up until then. And, of course, I finished my 9th inning and sitting on the bench with no runs yet. And Vic Wirtz comes up to bat with 2 men out, 2 balls, 2 strikes on him, and he hit the pitch in the upper deck for a home run. And, of course, I'm the first one at home plate to visit with him. And in getting out there, I jumped up so quick, and the dugout in Detroit is very shallow, and I banged my head, and we didn't have helmets until here, so I've been all right. But I went out to meet him, and it was one of the biggest thrills of my time. And, of course, being able to play for Detroit was a great thrill also.
They called him Mount Morris because Jack Morris would blow up after getting roughed up in a game in Tiger Stadium. But listen to his feelings about the old ballpark. Tell me about the night you came in to pitch for a special young man, and when you weren't supposed to pitch in the 70s, what happened?
Well, it was a game early in the year, 1978. I was actually in and out of the bullpen all year. Ralph Houck was the manager. He kept me up in the big leagues that year because I think he liked me. And I truly, when I reflect my whole career, it was probably one year that I probably did not deserve to be in the big leagues because I was hurting. My arm was hurting, and I had not completely recovered from rehab. And Ralph brought me up out of spring training and put me in the bullpen. And I remember our pitching coach came up to me about 20 minutes before game time, a game which Mark Fidrich was starting, and at the time the Bird was the word in Detroit. He was big. There was 45 to 50,000 people there. And he came up and he says, "Get your spikes on, you're going to pitch." And I looked at him like, "You're crazy. You know, I'm not pitching. Bird's pitch." He says, "No, he can't pitch. He's hurting. He can't pitch. You're going to start." So I hurried and got my spikes on and kind of makeshift, tried to get myself mentally ready, and I'm walking out to the bullpen to get my warm-ups in, and the PA announcer announces over the stadium speaker that, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Fidrich is unable to pitch today. Today's starting pitcher will be Jack Morris," and 45,000 people stood up and booed. It's crazy because I ended up beating Texas in that game, and by the end of the day they were cheering, but it was one of those things where the Bird was such a big name and had such a great year his rookie year and was so popular that people literally just came out to see him.
You know, you're always honest about Tiger Stadium. Now in retrospect, the place is coming down. 2 things. First, tell me what it was like pitching there. Was it that frustrating because of the short dimensions? And secondly, how do you feel about it coming down?
Well, first of all, I can honestly say that indirectly or directly, Tiger Stadium made Jack Morris a pitcher. I had to learn that the only weapon I had was the grass. Everything that was in the air was a potential home run there. And especially with the wind and the way the ball can carry at different times of the year with the humidity levels. And, it's strictly a hitter's ballpark. But when Sparky got there and realized he had a young pitching staff, I think he realized that the only thing he could do to help his pitchers is to let the grass grow a little bit longer than most stadiums. And we had our groundskeeper make sure that the infield was a little bit taller than, I would say, most of the ballparks we played in the American League.
Right.
And I was forced to learn that if I'm going to give up base hits, they're going to be balls that get through the infield, and occasionally you're going to make a mistake and the ball goes out of the ballpark. But if you can get guys to hit the ball on the ground and have that grass and our great infield that we had, if we can have them hit the ball on the ground towards one of those guys, we got a chance to make a living here. And somehow I was able to do that. I look back after my years in Detroit, and I came back as a Twin and as a Blue Jay and as a Cleveland Indian, and when I come back into Tiger Stadium, I always shook my head and say, how in the hell did I ever make it that long there? Because it was a hitter's ballpark.
Frank Fenick is the retired groundskeeper of Tiger Stadium and a man who would keep the grass as deep as Sparky Anderson would want it. In all those years of trying to make the ballpark look good, what was the hardest part of doing all of that?
I think our hardest time was when we had the Lions and the Tigers. I think that was the worst time because after the season ended with the Lions, we would go right into taking out the sod, which was ever left. So we had to we took out the whole field and made a brand new field every spring for the Tigers when they'd come in. And you're talking about laying sod in late February and almost all of March, and usually in them days our opening day was April the 6th, as you remember. I remember one year, Joe, the weather was so bad, we laid sod the morning of opening day, and K-Line, the star and the man that he was, never complained once. I'd see him cutting for the right field foul line, and he'd take 2 or 3 pieces of sod with him because it was just laying there. And what we used to try to do, we would try to staple it down. They have sod staples that we would try to put it down so it would remain stable. But that one year we had such a hard time. We were lucky we had any kind of grass at all for opening day.
Did any of the players over the years, Frank, and all your years down there, did they come to you and say, can you do this for me and do that for me, but whether it's the pitching mound, the grass, the outfield, the batter's box? Who asked you some special stuff?
Well, the funniest one was Gibby when he first come up. I remember they were playing him in the outfield, and he wasn't very good with the glove, and he didn't have too good of an arm. And one day he asked me if it would be possible to let the grass grow long enough so that when the ball came out to him, he would stop, and all he had to do was run and pick it up and throw it into the infield.
What about that business of the I don't know who it was, Boggs or whoever it was, Wade Boggs, coming into Detroit and say, hey, home plate is tilted towards right field, and it really is, and you'd say, no, it wasn't, but what's the story there?
McNamara was managing the Red Sox, and he asked if they could use the field the day before the opener. I hate to do that, but for them I did, because I used to like John, and I used to like the Red Sox, so we let him use it, and I heard a lot of yelling and screaming, and the day they were working out, and one of the guys that works on the field for me came over and he said, they're raising hell with us about third base. So I went out on the field, and Mac was there with Boggs, and Mac wanted to know why third base was resting on the foul line, and I couldn't understand what he was getting at. I said, what do you mean, why is the base resting on the foul line? He said the bag should be inside the foul line. And I asked him, I said, boy, I sure wonder how the hell you got to become a manager. And Boggs was really the one that straightened him out, because he didn't believe me that the bag actually lays on the foul line. Wade was sticking up for Mac, and he said, well, he says, you don't have to be so cocky. He says, your home plate is cockeyed. And I said, now where are you coming up with this? I says, we have that checked every year. He says, well, you're off about the width of my thumb. And I remember Mary Schroeder, the photographer for the Free Press, was following us around, and Wade walked me up to the home plate area, and he stuck his thumb down there, and he said, that's exactly how far off you are. And I started laughing, and I had Wade standing in the box, and I said, now look down the foul line and see if the foul line curves to you. I said, because the one on the wall in the outfield is made of steel, and that isn't going to bend. If we're crooked, we're going to have to end up there. I said, do you see a curve in our foul line going from home plate to the outfield? And he agreed with me, and finally he said, well, maybe it is an optical illusion. But that got around, and every time the teams would come in, they would always check and see if it was cockeyed. I even think Gibby thought it was cockeyed.
You've spent more time in Tiger Stadium than anybody I know. I can't think of another person in the last 40 years or so who spent more time in that ballpark than you, because you're there in the summer, the winter, the autumn, with the whole thing, the springtime. As you went around the field, you find any crazy stuff in the outfield grass or anything like that?
Well, the funniest thing, I would say, Charlie Silvera's teeth.
His teeth?
His teeth, yeah.
His teeth!
Yeah, Charlie Silvera evidently was having a problem with his uppers, and he wrapped them up and he put them in his pocket during practice, and he's running around out there shagging balls, and I guess he didn't miss his teeth till the next morning, because he come running across the field about 6 in the morning. Usually on a day game we get there kind of early. We get there by 7, and by 7:30 we're starting the mowers up and getting the grass cut for that afternoon game. And he come running across the field yelling, "Don't cut the grass, don't cut the grass." And I met him halfway. I said, "What's the matter, Charlie?" He says, "You know, I lost my teeth." And he told me how much he had spent on them. So we had all the boys out there on their hands and knees looking, and we finally found them out in right field somewhere.
Frank Beckmann of WJR gives us a double perspective of Tiger Stadium, first as a boy, then as a professional broadcaster. Frank, just tell me what this ballpark has meant to you over the years.
You know, it didn't hit me until opening day this year, where a lot of thoughts crossed my mind, Joe, and I sat there staring out at the field from the press box, and it just struck me how different phases of my life had. It was almost like they were bookmarks that were printed by Tiger Stadium. I remember going there and learning to love baseball with my mom and dad, going to see doubleheaders on Sundays, Charlie Maxwell and company. Then when I started playing baseball and went there as a kid, I remember we used to have Melott Lutheran night there, and all the kids from the Melott League got to run out of the area right next to the flagpole, and you went around the field and stood out on the field for the national anthem and then went in the seats. And it was at Tiger Stadium where I found out I needed glasses because my mom saw I was squinting at the scoreboard. And then when I was a little older, my first job was really at Tiger Stadium when I was one of those kid ushers who used to wipe off the reserved seats for the customers for quarter tips. And then as a broadcaster, you know, I don't think my career was validated until I was named Tigers announcer, because it's the biggest job to be a baseball announcer. And you know, then to do the TV thing now with Al Kaline is another step in my career. And it's like it doesn't hit you until you're sitting there at a special moment and you stare out at that field, and thoughts come washing back from your entire life, really. And it's amazing how much of my life has revolved around that ballpark.
You know, Frank, we all have our memories. Give me a couple of yours, and they don't necessarily have to be the big memories that a lot of people recall. Maybe, I don't know what it could be with you, but I know there are some things in your mind. Give me a couple that have stayed with you through the years.
Well, one was the Tigers in '68 when they clinched the pennant against the Yankees on Don Wirt's base hit, and I was one of the kids out in the stands in left field and ran onto the field. I remember the green seats. I remember the pure joy. You know, just celebrating. You know, we were all on the field, and we didn't know what we were doing out there. We didn't know why we ran out there. We just knew we were so happy we couldn't control ourselves anymore. The players were all gone by the time most of us got on the field, but you know, we just had to be out there exuberant. That memory stands out. Seeing Al Kaline as a youngster slice a ball into the seats and right, and I don't know why this stays with me, but it always did. I was with my dad at the game against the White Sox. In the first inning, he sliced one to right, and it got into the front row of the lower deck in right field. And the game was rained out. And the significance of that didn't really hit me, but the memory stuck, and the significance of it hit me when I was a broadcaster, and I covered his induction into the Hall of Fame, and realized he could have been the first man in history with 3,000 hits and 400 home runs, except his career ended at 399. And that one that I saw as a kid that got wiped out by rain that day against the White Sox would have been it. And,
that's funny.
And, I mean, that just stays with me because he was my favorite ball player.
Mayor Archer has been in love with Tiger Stadium for a long time. Mayor, you of all people, in fact, you own a ballpark, let's not kid about it, but you of all people must have some feeling about what goes on at Michigan and Trumbull and what it means to this city.
Joe, growing up as a youngster, I used to be Frank Leary because Frank Leary was a great pitcher, and me and the youngsters that I was playing ball with would pitch against each other, and we'd use the school building, which was brick, as a backdrop as we would try to strike each other out with tennis balls tonight. And at a time when Detroit really needed a lift, in 1967, following the riots in the city of Detroit, the Detroit Tigers almost pulled it off. but there was enormous pride in the city. It sort of helped us come together. But then in 1968, with Mickey Lolich and Earl Wilson and Gates Brown and all of the guys that was on that team, they did the impossible. They won the World Series. And it was just a huge, huge sense of pride all throughout not only Detroit or southeastern Michigan, but for the state. But it was really important for the city of Detroit.
1984, Tiger Stadium. Tell me about that.
There was some great anticipation as we just took off, and it seemed like we just couldn't lose anything in the early spring and into the summer. So it was clear we were going to win. My wife and I were, unlike being glued at the television in 1968, we were down at the stadium in the stands, and I can remember Ghostbusters was one of the popular songs at the time, but they were using, as opposed to using the words Ghostbusters, it was Goose Gossage. And when Kirk Gibson came up to the bat with Goose Gossage on the mound, you could almost have a sense and a feeling of whether it was true or not about the stories of Babe Ruth coming up to the mound and pointing to the outfield where he was going to hit a home run and actually did it. At least that's what you'd see in the movies when we were growing up. You just had the sense of power against power, a giant against a giant, a true professional against a true professional, and what the outcome was going to be. And doggone it if he didn't knock that sucker clean out of the park, and the whole stadium just erupted. And you might recall as Kirk was coming around, he lifted up his arms and had one of the biggest growls and a lot of pride in the Tiger organization. Of course, that was what was captured on our front page. So Tiger Stadium has an enormous sense of emotional feeling, pride, and the like, and it's one of America's great ballparks. As long as there is a person alive who has ever been to Briggs or Tiger Stadium, that stadium will never, ever die.
Tom Gage of the Detroit News is the senior baseball writer in Detroit, a man who has great affection for Tiger Stadium. Tom, you've covered this team 21 years for our newspaper, and so you have a little different perspective than a lot of people. You look at this ballpark now, it's going. What are your feelings about Tiger Stadium?
Well, I love Tiger Stadium. And the time I love it the most is when I'm done working and I don't take the elevator down. I take the steps down instead, and the place is empty, and it's absolutely beautiful. But it is time. It's time. It's had a great run, but it's a little rickety now.
What has it meant to you to be a baseball writer in that press box looking down at all of these games? Because you've seen probably more games than anybody in Detroit from a media standpoint in the last 21 years.
I'm probably doing the job I always wanted to do, Joe. When I was a kid, I used to play baseball games and write a little story. I mean, baseball board games with spinners and write a story afterwards. And I can't say that when I was a kid I would look up at the press box and say that's where I want to be, but I'm doing what I think I always wanted to do. And I've probably sat in the same chair now for 21 years and had the same vantage point for 21 years. And the new place is going to seem strange because people say you don't get any kind of perspective from up there, but I've kind of trained my eye to know what's going out and what isn't going out. It's high up. We're kind of above the clouds up there. After so many years, you consider it almost a second home.
You've told me many times about your experience of your first game at Tiger Stadium, and I got a kick out of it.
Well, the first game at Tiger Stadium involved. This was in 1976, and I filled in for Dan Ewald, who had left to take another job. And I went up to Ralph Houck, and Ralph Houck was, of course, kind of a gruff guy, and he was especially tough on rookie writers. And he was talking about John Hiller being out on the mound, and he said, "Well, I thought he was getting tired." And my first question as a major league beat writer said, "Well, when did you think he was when did you think he was getting tired?" "How the heck should I?" And he started yelling at me, and I thought, oh boy, my career is not going to last long. And he apologized, as Ralph always did. You know, he would bark at you in public and apologize in private. You know, at that moment I thought, oh, I'm not going to last a month, let alone 20 years. My favorite place to sit was in the overhang, though, in right field, and I never caught the only foul ball I ever got was when Gage Brown hit one through the exit, and I was standing in line to get a hot dog, and it landed at my feet. I positioned myself all over the place trying to get a foul ball. Finally, one came to me, but the overhang was a great seat.
Tony Clark is still new to the Tigers, but he's a man of great sensitivity, one who speaks with deep reverence about our ballpark. Tony, you know, doing this tape, I'm going back many, many years, but I would like to ask you your feeling about Tiger Stadium now. You're the veteran around here, only 4 years. What has it meant to you to play in this ballpark, Tiger Stadium, that's coming down at the end of the season?
Joe, the thing that was most exciting for me was the first night I came up, have the opportunity to look around the ballpark, and you see all the dents in the walls and all the scrapes in the paint, and you know, you sit back and you think, well, I wonder who put that dent in that wall. Or you hear about the long home runs that guys hit. You hear about the home run Reggie hit here, Johnny Bench hit here, Clemente hit here. You hear all the home runs of all these guys, and you sit back and think, well, heck, I'm wearing the same uniform that they all wore. I'm playing on the same field that they all played on. And it's hard sometimes when you first come up not to get caught up in that. I was excited about being in the big leagues. You compound that with playing in a storied ballpark, in a storied organization, in a storied uniform, on a storied field, and you know, the excitement gets to you. And now I'm to the point where, you know, I know I'm going to be in the lineup the last time a professional team plays on this field. It's an honor and a privilege to have that opportunity, as much as it was an honor and a privilege to play here the very first night.
Is there a particular memory for you, not necessarily the ball over the roof or whatever, something that's passed through your mind, something that's been very special to you that you've seen or done here at Tiger Stadium?
The biggest thing for me was really the day after I came up. We were playing, I had a series with the Cleveland Indians. And, you know, so many times you're watching these guys on TV when you grow up. And the first inning, Eddie Murray comes down to first base. And, you know, I'm a switch hitter, and here's one of the greatest switch hitters of all time. And this is my first start, first game. He comes down to first base, and I mean, I'll never forget it. You know, I didn't know what to say, and the only thing that I could say was, "How you doing today, Mr. Murray?" And it was just, you know, it kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about as far as the aura around the stadium. You know, that same aura came with him down to first base, and you look over on the on-deck circle, and Dave Winfield was still playing, and so he's on the on-deck circle, and it was that feeling of, I'm in the big leagues. This is what it's all about. There is no level higher than where I'm at, and it solidified itself when Mr. Murray came down to first base, and I had the opportunity to say hi.
John McHale Jr. is president of the Detroit Tigers, a man who knew the ballpark as a boy and is building the new stadium, Comerica Park, in downtown Detroit. John, you know, of all the people that we're talking to, you above all are responsible for the new ballpark here. Let's not kid about it. Let's not be modest. You're the one that's pushing this whole project. But I know that you have some very, very deep feelings about Tiger Stadium.
Joe, it's the original concept of a stadium in my mind and in the minds of my 5 brothers and sisters. It's the first place where we came to see a Major League Baseball game.
All right. Now, your dad was the general manager in 2 years, I guess 57, 59, something like that. And I know you didn't actually grow up in the ballpark, but what memories do you have then when your dad was here and he was in the front office before being the GM? What kind of things do you recall about this place?
My dad was, he began as an assistant in the minor league department and then moved on to various other posts in player personnel and became general manager in 1957 and served until 1959. He and my mother treated a trip to Tiger Stadium for us as a special occasion, and I can recall being here maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And it was extraordinarily special for all of us, especially growing up in Detroit with in the mid-'50s with all of the interest in Tiger baseball at that time. the thing that impressed me more than anything else was the sense of otherworldliness that occurred as we came into the stadium. At that time, the motor access, the car access for front office people was into what is now the Tiger Plaza, and there was a gate which was raised, and it was as if you left the street and entered a building which was to a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old largely unidentifiable from outside into a wonderland. It was inconceivably joyful for us to be there because, of course, we love baseball and we love sports and we love being with our father. And we would come up the back elevator and try to behave as well as we could, and then move with my father through the offices and then down into the seating bowl. And of course, the overwhelming impression in walking out was of the great expanse of green grass surrounded by this courtyard of stands, topped off by what was then the AC Delco sign on the scoreboard in center field, which lit up when home runs were hit. We sat down low, typically someplace off of third base, and we used to pay special attention to Reno Bertoia, who was the third baseman at that time, watching where he positioned himself and what he was doing, and devoting way more attention to him than he needed or wanted, but we watched his every move.
John, your feelings about the ballpark coming down, you know, I'm not saying you're the guy that's destroying it. It has to happen. We all know that, but your sentiments about thinking that this is the end, the future is the next century, and you're building a good-looking ballpark. I'll say that, little commercial here. But your feeling about this ballpark no longer in existence?
Well, it's bittersweet, Joe. There's no doubt about it. It's the passing of a relative. But God and men make things that can be beautiful and can serve their purposes, but nothing lasts forever. And the facts are that this community has changed and this game has changed, and the circumstances are such that if the game essentially is to be a part of the city in the next century and to be healthy, it's got to go to Comerica Park. That doesn't make it any easier or more pleasant to walk around and think that soon this site, which has been home to baseball for over 100 years, will soon be that no more. But we just need to enjoy it and feel proud for what it has meant to the game and the city, and resign ourselves to go forward in the best way we can so that the next site has an equal history 100 years from now.